burning like a fire in a soul.
Some of you may not know, but that's actually the way I get ready to preach on Sunday mornings. And I actually look a whole lot like that when I'm warming up and getting ready. Well, as I was researching for this sermon today, I was looking at different news stories and things, and I found a news story back in 2005 about a village in Turkey that was devastated when a single sheep walked off the cliff and died. The shepherds were out eating breakfast, and the flock was grazing near this cliff, and the problem wasn't that one sheep went off the cliff. It was that 1,500 other sheep followed the one sheep off the cliff. Now, if there's good news, I guess, is that only about 450 sheep actually died, because once they started piling up, it was like a big pillow that protected the 1,000 sheep who didn't die. But that story is true. You can actually Google it if you don't believe me. Don't do it now. I'm trying to preach. But when you get later, you can Google that story from 2005. But if you don't know about sheep, sheep are not smart animals. They're not. They have a real tendency to wander off. They'll graze and wander and graze, and next thing they know, they're lost. And they have a tendency to follow blindly, too. So if one sheep heads off and gets lost, lots of sheep head off. Or if one sheep goes over a cliff, lots of sheep go over a cliff. That's just the way it works. We're in the second week of our sermon series called Unleashed, where we're talking about how you can be better equipped to make the difference in the world around you by sharing in Jesus' ministry to a lost world. Now, here's Jesus' ministry. This is what he says about himself in Luke 19:10. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That's Jesus' mission, and then he encourages us and challenges us to be a part of that mission. Well, after Jesus rose from the dead, he hung out with his apostles for about 40 days before he went back to heaven. He would meet with them, and then he would go off somewhere. We don't know where he went, but then he'd come back and see them again. And towards the end of that 40 days, his apostles are having dinner with him, and after dinner, they start asking him a question about when he's going to set up his earthly kingdom and make Israel supreme again. So it's clear, even at this point, after he's died and rose from the dead, they still don't fully understand his ministry. And Jesus puts them off. He doesn't answer the question. Instead, he gives them a challenge. Let's look at that. This is Acts 1, 6-8. Then they gathered around him and asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Now, if you look closely at this challenge, he says, start right where you are, where you live. He says, start in Jerusalem. That's where they were. And then he says, go on, spread out into all Judea. Judea was like the big territory around Jerusalem. Think of it like a small state. And then Samaria was the region next to Jerusalem. And then it says, to the very ends of the earth. Now, I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but Katy, Texas, we're the ends of the earth. We're a long way from Jerusalem where the church started. And so we ought to be thankful that for 2,000 years, the church has taken up this mission to share the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus around the world. And it's expanded all the way around the world to Katy, Texas. And the challenge for us 2,000 years later is exactly the same as it was back then. We're called to share the love of Jesus with others and to be witnesses of what Jesus has done for us. So last week, Chris talked about being a witness in your own home to your family in that small area. Well, today we're talking about being a witness in your community, the community of Katy, as we begin to broaden out. So he says, be a witness. Well, what does a witness mean? It means tell us what you know. You've been changed by Jesus, and all it means is that you tell other people about what you've experienced. You don't have to know the whole Bible. You don't have to have answers to all the questions. You're just telling people and testifying about what happened to you and how Jesus has impacted your life. You know, Jesus often described his ministry as being a shepherd. He called himself the good shepherd who would die for the sheep, and that was the way he would refer to himself on occasion. And he also told a parable about a lost sheep in Luke chapter 15. Actually, in Luke 15, he actually tells 3 different parables about reaching out to people who are lost. Now, the most famous of those is the parable of the lost or prodigal son. We talked about that parable back in the summer. You may remember that. But before Jesus tells the parable of the lost or prodigal son, he tells the parable of the lost sheep. Now, before we dive into this parable of the lost sheep, I want to look for just a minute at what a parable is. If you don't remember from this past summer, you weren't here, a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. In other words, it's a made-up story that communicates an important Bible truth. Jesus usually didn't translate or tell us exactly what those parables mean. There are a couple of reasons he did that. But he left it up to his listeners or his readers to interpret the important Bible truth that came out of this story that he told. Now, one of the ways that we can interpret that or understand what a parable means is we look at who his audience was and why he told the parable. And so we're going to start out today, before we get into the parable of the lost sheep, by looking at the setup for this parable and see who Jesus' audience was going to be and why he told the story. Let's look at that. This is Luke 15, 1 through 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So we're looking at who his audience is. And you might first think his audience for this parable is the sinners and the tax collectors. But that's not right. It starts because he's teaching the sinners and the tax collectors. But the church people, that's his audience. He's looking at the Pharisees and the teachers of the law because they're upset with Jesus that he had the audacity to teach people who were far from God. And so he's going to tell them this parable of the lost sheep. Now, some of you may wonder why tax collectors are lumped in with sinners. There's a good explanation for that. We may not love the IRS today, but tax collectors back in that day, they were crooks. I mean, there's no other way to say it. First of all, they had contracts with the enemy, the Roman Empire, to collect taxes. And the way that worked is they had to give a certain amount of tax back to Rome. Everything else they collected, they got to keep. And so they got very, very wealthy by cheating their friends and neighbors out of their hard-earned money. They could tax anything they wanted, and they could tax as much as they could get away with. So let's say maybe you're coming into the city with a cart or a wagon of goods. They might tax the goods that you're delivering. They might also tax the number of wheels on your cart and the number of horses or donkeys that were pulling the cart. And so you could see how people would get very upset because these people are basically cheating their friends and neighbors out of their hard-earned money. And so tax collectors were lumped in with other sinners. Now, some of you might go, well, wait, we're all sinners. And you're right, but that's not what this is talking about here. It's talking about people who were known for their sin. So one example of that would be people whose career or profession is sin, so prostitutes would fit into that sinner category. But it was also people who were known in the community for a particular sin struggle. You can think like the Scarlet Letter or think about the town drunk. Everybody knew their sin struggle. And these were the people that were known as sinners. And they were mostly ignored and overlooked by the religious leaders. In fact, the religious teachers called rabbis, they wouldn't even teach somebody that was known as a sinner. You had to be good enough to hear how you can be better. And so when Jesus starts teaching these sinners and these tax collectors, the religious people get all upset and they can't believe that Jesus is hanging out with people that he shouldn't hang out with, and he's teaching people that don't deserve to be taught. And when Jesus hears this muttering, he tells the religious people this parable of the lost sheep. Look at verse 3. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, imagine he's talking to these righteous people that feel like they don't need to repent. And he's saying, God is more excited about one sinner that repents than all of you people. So that's the way they would took it. Now, Jesus would often tell parables and stories about farming because a whole lot of his listeners were either farmers or they were related to farmers, or at least they grew crops or had a garden for their family. And so they understood this idea of farming and gardening. And so he does that. But in this instance, he's talking about being a shepherd with sheep. And it's important to understand that with 100 sheep, this shepherd had a lot of sheep. The normal flock size for back then, if you look at the history, is about 20 to 30 sheep, because that's kind of what a shepherd could keep up with. This guy has 100 sheep, which is, they're going to understand, is a lot of sheep. Now, to me, if you have 2 sheep, that's a lot of sheep. If you got more than one, that's a lot. But back then, more than 20 or 30 was a lot. And so they understood that. And I think there's a tendency when we hear a parable to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of one of the characters so we can better understand it. And so maybe you're sitting there thinking, I think I might be the shepherd. You're not the shepherd. You're a less flattering character in the story. And so am I. We're the sheep. We're the sheep that often get lost and just wander off. We tend to wander off cliffs. We tend to follow people when they get lost, and we blindly follow them. We're either one of the 99 sheep who are found, or we're the lost sheep. And that's where we fit into this story. Jesus is the shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes after the one. Now, while we are the sheep in this parable, we are called to join in Jesus' ministry to reach the sheep who are still lost. Once we're found, we're brought into this ministry to share with the sheep that are still lost. We're given a mission to go out and to find God's children who are lost or ignored or overlooked or forgotten or abandoned. We're charged with helping bring them home to Jesus. Our mission statement here at Charis City Church is that we want to show intentional grace to people one person at a time. In other words, we believe that we can change our community with Jesus if we go out of our way to show Jesus' love and Jesus' story to individuals. See, we're focusing on that same idea. We're going after the one. There's 3 things that I think we can learn from this shepherd in this parable of the lost sheep that it will help us understand how we can be witnesses in our community in Katy, Texas. Here's the first thing. We have to see like Jesus. You see, so often we see groups of people, or we see types of people, or we see colors of people, but we don't see people as individuals. We don't see them as unique children of God. We don't understand how they fit in to the kingdom of God. The shepherd in this parable, he does that. He sees each individual sheep. He's got 100 sheep. I think a normal shepherd probably wouldn't notice if one sheep wandered off. I'm going to be honest, if I was a shepherd and I had 100 sheep, I probably wouldn't notice if 10 sheep went off. But this shepherd, he loves every single sheep. He knows every single sheep. He recognizes them. He knows their name. And when this one sheep wanders off, he knows to go after it because he knows it's missing. That's how Jesus saw people during his ministry. He would so often be in this crowd, and he would go from being in a crowd to find the one who was lost or needed something. I love the story of Zacchaeus. If you've been in church for a long time, you probably even remember it when you were growing up. It's a great kid's story, but it's also a great example of Jesus leaving the crowd and going to the one. So Jesus is walking with this huge crowd. It was probably hundreds or thousands of people who are just hanging out with Jesus, hoping to hear his teaching and see him do some miracles. But this one tax collector, who would have been one of these people that was in this group that Jesus is teaching to, this tax collector is short, and so he decides to climb up in a tree to see Jesus as he goes by. He sees Jesus, but Jesus also sees him. See, even in that big group, he saw this tax collector. He saw that Zacchaeus was one of his lost sheep. He saw him, and he went to his house. And because he left the many to go to the one, it changed Zacchaeus' life forever. And that's just one example. There's example after example of where Jesus would be in this big group of people, and he would leave to find the one. Jesus was always looking for the one. You think about some examples. The woman at the well, he goes out of his way for one individual. The woman who was caught in adultery, people who were sick and paralyzed. He went out of his way, would stop teaching, and go to help those people. He always saw the one that was overlooked, the one that was ignored by others or looked down upon. Jesus saw them and he loved them. That's the challenge for us as individual Christians and for us as a church. We've got to see people like Jesus sees them. We need to notice the people that other people ignore. We need to notice the people that are hurting and overlooked and looked down upon. We need to see those individuals as children of God. Each and every one of them are loved by God. They're either a child who's found or a child who's lost. Most of you guys know Beth Moore. She's a great Bible teacher. You may have heard this story if you follow Beth Moore, but it's one of the stories she tells, and I love it. She says that she was flying from one speaking engagement in one town to another, and she's sitting at the gate at the airport, and as she's sitting there, she sees this elderly man in a wheelchair, and she says he was dirty, pretty unkempt. He had long, matted hair. He was the kind of person that people ignore, and she said her first thought was, I'm going to give that dude some space. I'm going to sit over here and let him sit over there. But she'd been sitting there for a little while, and she started feeling God calling her to go talk to him. She was like, I don't want to go talk to him. I'm busy. I'm trying to get ready. I've got so much to do. And at first she thought God was calling her to go share her faith with this man. But after a little while, she realized God was calling her to brush this man's hair, which she thought was really weird. And in fairness, it is really weird. She says she's never been called to brush anybody's hair before this or after this. But in this moment, she felt like God was calling her to go brush this man's hair. And so she put it off for a little bit. And then finally she gets up and she goes over. And she says as quietly as she can, because she doesn't want to embarrass the man with people sitting all around. So she says, Sir, may I have the pleasure of brushing your hair? And he says, what? And so she says a little louder, still not trying to draw attention. She says, Sir, may I have the pleasure of brushing your hair? And he said, little lady, if you want me to hear, you're going to have to talk a lot louder than that. Now everybody is watching that's in the area. They now have their attention on this moment. And so she just says, Sir, may I have the pleasure of brushing your hair? And he looked a little confused, but he said, well, I guess if you really want to. She didn't really want to. But she said, Sir, I'd be glad to. I just don't have a brush. And he said he had a brush in his bag that was underneath his wheelchair. And so this great Bible teacher that regularly teaches to thousands of people got down on her hands and knees and went through his bag and found the brush. And she began to brush the tangles and mats out of his hair. And she says after two girls, she was a really good expert at brushing tangles out of hair. But she says as she brushed this man's hair, she said, I've never felt such love for an individual that I didn't know before. And so after she finishes and she gets all the tangles brushed out of his hair, she does what she thinks she's supposed to do, and she says, Sir, do you know my Jesus? And to her surprise, he says, yeah, I've known Jesus for many years. He says, when I started dating my bride 40 years ago, she wouldn't even date me until I got to know Jesus. So I got to know Jesus a long time ago, and I've followed him ever since. She's a little surprised by that. And he said, as a matter of fact, I'm actually going to see my bride right now. I had to fly into the city to have open heart surgery. And so I've been here for several months, and she was too sick to travel. And so I'm finally getting to fly back to see her. And he said, I was just sitting here thinking, I'm embarrassed about how I'm going to look to see my bride for the first time in months. And Beth suddenly knew exactly why God had her go over and brush this man's hair. But she was still a little surprised because she thought it would be an opportunity for her to share her faith. A few minutes later, she was boarding the plane, and a flight attendant comes up to her with tears just running down her face. And she said, can I ask you a question? Why would you do that for that man? She smiled, and she said, do you know my Jesus? She says, Jesus has this incredible love for me, and now I'm called to show that same incredible love for the people around me. She showed intentional grace. She saw this man like Jesus sees him, not as somebody that was dirty and unkempt, but somebody who needed help, somebody that needed intentional grace. And because of that, she got an opportunity to share her faith. But I want you to know something else about what happens here. When she shared her faith, she didn't have to give a history of the Old Testament. She didn't have to do any Greek translation for this flight attendant. What she said was, do you know my Jesus? Jesus has this incredible love for me, and he calls us to have this incredible love for other people. Sharing your faith can be that simple, because that's what you're doing, is telling people what Jesus has done for you. So let me ask you, how do you see people? When you see somebody, do you see them as Jesus sees them? If we're going to play a part in seeing our community brought back to Jesus. And if we're going to see revival here in Katy, Texas, we have to see individuals the way Jesus sees individuals. Because when we do that, it is going to transform the way we think about that person and how we want to share our faith. Because when you see people like Jesus, you're going to see the homeless man on the corner that you pass every day on the way to work as a child of God. Somebody who's been through some tough things in his life. Somebody that needs help. You're going to see him as a lost sheep. You're going to see the difficult person at work as somebody who's hurting and going through some difficult things, not as somebody that's just difficult and hard to deal with that you stay away from. When you see people like Jesus sees people, you're going to want to share your faith with them because you're going to want to give them the hope that you have in this life and the hope that you have in the next life. Well, the first thing we have to do if we're going to be witnesses here in Katy, Texas for Jesus is we have to see people like Jesus. Here's the second thing. We have to search like Jesus. The shepherd in our parable, he realizes that one sheep has gone off, and he leaves where he is, and he goes to find the sheep. Now, this shepherd could have thought, wait a second, I'm not going after that stupid sheep. I've got 99. I've still got a way bigger flock than most people have. He might have thought, that stupid sheep deserves whatever happens to it going off by itself. Or maybe he worried about the risk. Maybe he could have said, if I go off and leave the 99 in the open country, and I go after the one, I'm going to come back, and now I'm going to have 99 lost sheep and one found sheep. But that's not what he does. He takes a risk. He leaves where he is to go after the one. Look back at verse 4. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? That's the way Jesus searches. He takes some risks. He goes after the one. But do we search like Jesus? So often I think we stay where we are in our comfort zone and we hang out with people that look like us, that talk like us, that think like us, rather than getting out and engaging with people who are different than us. We decide that it's good enough. We've got busy lives. We got busy jobs. We got a family to take care of. We've got so much responsibility. We're just going to kind of manage what we've got. But that's not searching like Jesus searches. This complacency happens to us as individual Christians, but it can also happen to us as churches. We can get completely content to show up for Sunday morning service, going maybe to a Bible study, and then hanging out with church people and getting to know them better. And we feel like we're doing exactly what we're supposed to do. But in reality, we're doing exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to do. If we want to reach our community for Jesus, we got to get out into the community where the people are. We have to search for people who need Jesus and develop a relationship with them. We have to take some chances. Got to get out of our comfort zone, take a little risk for the people who are lost. See, we want to be a church that gets out of this place and we go out into our community. And so that's why we had Stacy Wilkins talk to you about Hearts for Heroes, because that's one of the ministries that we partner with, where we go into downtown Houston and serve homeless veterans and at-risk veterans. We also work with another organization here in Katy that serves the homeless community here in Katy, Texas. We want to leave this place, the comfort of this place, and we want to go out to where they are. When we started Charis City Church, we decided that we wanted to take some risks. And I committed to God when we started this church that we were going to take some risk to try to reach people for Jesus. And just starting this little church was a risk. We didn't know who would come. We didn't know where we were going to meet. We didn't know anything. But now we've got this great core of people. I'm excited to say we have like 55 or 56 people signed up for Bible study. Even more have signed up after the first week. It's a huge sign of growth, and we're getting really comfortable in this little chapel. But we don't want to stay comfortable. We want to get out of our comfort zone and take a next big step. And so I'm so excited today to share some big news with you. Check out this video. One of the things that amazed me about everything through the process of starting Charis City Church is how God has provided. When we got ready to found the church a year ago, God provided the little chapel at Church on the Rock, and it's been amazing. But now it's time for our next step, and God's provided again. We're going to partner with Cross Point Church, and we're going to use the east wing of their facility on Sunday mornings to have Charis City Church. Let's check out that new facility. How awesome is that?
We're standing here in the common area where guests and attenders will be greeted with warm smiles and warm coffee as we gather together for worship. But one of the most exciting things about this new space is actually geared towards our Charis kids. Our kids' ministry will get to be in the same building as us, and for a parent, this means things like easier check-in and easier access to your kids. This is a great place for your kids to learn and play and grow together as we grow as a church family. As you walk through the common area, you'll enter into a new worship space. So let's check that out together.
I'm so pumped about this new worship area. The number one reason why is because of how big this stage truly is. This allows us to keep growing as a team. This space also allows us to be creative and have an interactive worship experience.
As we create an engaging worship service, we want to make sure that you have the best experience possible, whether you're in person or online. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by improving our live stream so that no matter where you are, you can be engaged and connected. And speaking of connected, we're sitting here on one of the couches in our common area, and there are tons of places just like this all around here where you can sit, have a coffee with friends, and just talk about life and get to know each other better. We're so excited about all the spaces and all the opportunities we have here, from the new bathrooms to the stages to even just the couches in this area. But let me tell you something, this isn't even the best spot.
Maybe the spot I like best at this whole facility is right here with the cross and the baptistry. And I just can't wait to see when Karis City Church gets to use this baptistry for the first time at the new facility. You know, we've challenged you in this series to show intentional grace and love to people one person at a time. That's what we want to do as a church. We want to get out of our comfort zone, take the next step. It's a big opportunity. It's also a big challenge. But if we're going to reach the city of Katy, we got to take these opportunities that God provides. I can't wait to see what God's going to do over the next year, 2 years, and 5 years. Thanks for being a part of Karis City. That's pretty cool. So I'm so excited. The lobby is heated. How different is that? That's going to be office. We're going to have coffee every Sunday. That's worth a little celebration, right? We're going to have a first-time guest area. We're going to get to do so many things differently. You know, I have loved our time at this little chapel, and I've loved the relationship that we've developed with another church here in Katy. But this new place is going to be more centrally located in the Katy area for us. It's going to have areas where we can have first-time guest ministry, parking ministry. We're going to have modern facilities and places to hang out. But the real mission in our move is to reach people who are lost. And I just can't wait until we get to use that baptistry that's heated. Yes, it's heated. All the time. Our first Sunday in the new location is April 3rd, which is almost a year to the date from when we started here in this little chapel. That'll give us 2 Sundays before Easter to get ready. We got a lot to get ready because it's going to be different. We're going to have different ministries, and I want to challenge you to share what we're doing. This video is going to go live on Facebook this afternoon, and I want to get you to share that because we want people to come to that new facility and see what we're doing. This move is a risk for us. Understand, it's a bigger and better facility, but it's going to take a lot more work. This chapel is set up every Sunday when we come in. You saw the sanctuary. We're going to have to set it up every Sunday with pipe and drape. We're going to have to put out all the chairs. We're going to have to set up the children's ministry area. We're going to have to make coffee. We really needed help to jump in, step, and seeing Jesus reach our community. That's what we're doing as a church. The challenge for you as individuals is there as well. Who are the people in your workplace that you need to show intentional grace to? Who's the neighbor that you need to invite over for dinner and tell about what Jesus has done for you in your life? That's our mission. You can't carry out your mission to share Jesus with other people by just hanging out with people that look like you and sound like you and talk like you. We got to get out of our comfort zone. We got to go to places where we're not used to going. We got to go out to where the lost people are. We got to develop relationships with people who are different from us. If we wanted to see Jesus transform our community, we've got to see individuals like Jesus sees them. We've got to search like Jesus by getting out of our comfort zone and going where they are. Here's the last thing that we learn from this shepherd in our parable. We have to rescue with Jesus. Look back at what the shepherd does in verses 5 through 7. And when he finds it, he's talking about the sheep here, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Jesus is saying he has a passion for the individual. He's got a passion for his children who are lost. Think about that. We are God's children. You know, a lot of years ago when my second Cameron was only about 3 and a half, we went over to San Antonio to a little theater over there to watch Blue's Clues live. You guys remember Blue's Clues? Yeah, it was on Nickelodeon from like 97 to 2007, something like that. My 2 oldest daughters loved it when they were little. And so we'd gone over to that theater, and we were watching it, and then at intermission, we decided to go down a little closer to check out the stage. And so we all walked down as a family, and we were looking at the stage. And then as intermission was getting close to ending, we headed back to our seats. And it was when we were going down the aisle that I suddenly realized, I don't see Cameron. And at first I was pretty calm about it. I just said, hey, Lil, where's Cam? She goes, I don't know. And so we were sure that she was in one of the aisles right around us. And so I was pretty calm, and I'm just looking around, and we don't see her. We don't see her anywhere around. And so now I'm starting to panic a little bit, and I'm going in and out of aisles trying to find Cameron before the show starts again. And at this point, I go to the back of the theater, and I find a security guard, and I tell him, I say, we can't find our 3.5-year-old daughter, Cameron. I said, she's blonde, and she's wearing this little pink Blue's Clues T-shirt. And at that point, it got kind of wild because he gets on the radio, and he says, we have a lockdown. And suddenly, security guards are making their way to every door, and they're locking the doors and keeping anybody from leaving so they don't leave with our child. At this point, I'm starting to panic. I mean, I'm looking for that one child. There's lots of children everywhere, but I'm looking for one, the one that's lost. I'm looking for blonde hair, pink shirt. Blonde hair, pink shirt. Where's blonde hair and pink shirt? And so the show starts to go back again. And so the security guards pull out flashlights, and so we're looking with flashlights. And I'm sure it was just a few minutes as I'm panicking as we're looking, but it seemed like hours. And then the radio squawked, and I hear them say, we have a little girl on the 3rd floor balcony. She's down front. She's wearing a pink Blue's Clues T-shirt with blonde hair. And so we run up the stairs, and we get to the top, and sure enough, she's just turning around from the front of the balcony. And you got to give her credit, right? She's sad, she's missing, but she still found a place where she could watch Blue's Clues. That's a fan right there. So she starts coming towards me, and when she sees me, she runs to me, and I'm running to her, and I pick her up, and I love her, and I said, baby, what happened? Why did you leave us? And with broken sobs, she says, I thought I saw Mommy going to the back of the theater, and so I followed her. And then I thought I saw her going up the stairs, and so I chased her because I thought she was leaving me. And I got up to the 3rd floor, and it wasn't Mommy, and I didn't know what to do. In that moment, I just loved her and hugged her. See, we have other children, but none of that mattered in that moment. There was one child that I was looking for, that one child that was lost. And I can just imagine Jesus looking for his lost children with very similar emotion, looking for blonde hair, pink shirt. Blonde hair, pink shirt. Where's the one? Where's the one that's missing? That's his great love for us. Jesus is pursuing us. He loved us so much that he came to earth and he died for us. And now he wants us to go from being lost to being saved. And he wants us as the found sheep to have that same love for other people, that same passion for seeing them go from being lost to being found. Now make no mistake, we are the sheep, and Jesus does the rescuing. But once we're found sheep, we're called to be a part of the rescue party. We're called to search with him to find the children who are still lost. We're called to get out into our community to find people who are different than us, who society ignores and overlooks, and to tell them how we've gone from being lost to being found, and hopefully helping lead them back home. You know, Jesus explains this mission to one of his apostles, Peter, in John chapter 21. So when Jesus was arrested and before he goes to the cross, obviously the disciples are scared to death. And they're following after Jesus as they're escorting him. And Peter is trying to get as close as he can. And people start saying, this guy knows Jesus. And 3 different times, Peter denied knowing Jesus because he didn't want to get arrested too. So you can imagine how devastated Peter is after Jesus is crucified. And then how guilty he must have felt when Jesus rose from the dead. And he realized this is the Son of God. And so during the period where Jesus is still hanging out with his apostles for that 40 days, he has a chance to sit down with Peter, and he restores him. Because Peter had been a little bit of a lost sheep during that point in time. But Jesus is restoring him and forgiving him, but he's also giving him mission. And so 3 different times Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And each time Peter says he does. And the last time he gets a little indignant, he says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. But I love that Jesus asked him 3 times, the same number of times that Peter had denied Jesus. But in this moment, he's also giving him an invitation and a plea to join his mission. Because when Peter says, yes, I love you, he says, take care of my sheep. One time, Jesus says, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I love you. And he says, then feed my lambs. And then he says it again, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I love you. And said, then feed my sheep. He's calling Peter into this ministry, into this responsibility to join the rescue party. And Jesus is saying the very same thing to each one of us. Do you love me? Then find my children. Do you love me? Bring my children home. That's the mission that we're being called into. He wants us to have the same love and concern for his other children that he does. He wants us to share our faith with them so that they can hopefully go from being lost to being found. He's inviting us, challenging us, pleading with us to be a part of the rescue party. See, the stakes are high. I'm not going to pull any punches here. Where your family and friends and coworkers spend their eternity may depend on whether you were willing to get out of your comfort zone and love them like Jesus and share your faith. It could be as simple as inviting them to church with you, showing them a little intentional grace and offering to pray with them when they're struggling with something. Or telling them how your life is different since you met Jesus and you went from being lost to being found. Let's get specific. If we think about all the people that are lost around us, it can be a little overwhelming. Where do we start? So here's my challenge for you. Pick just one. I want to challenge you this week to pick one person that you know that's lost, and I want to challenge you to show intentional grace to them, and then invite them to church or share your faith with them. Take some opportunity. Let's get really specific. Do you have one? Do you have somebody in your mind? In just a second, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for me. But at the same time, I want you to pray for God to present an opportunity for you to show intentional grace to that person. For God to give you the courage to share your faith. For God to give you the wisdom. But I want you to first pray that God will prepare their heart for what you're going to do. As I pray, you pray for yourself that God would give you courage and his love. Let's pray together.